What is going on, everybody? Alex Rüdinger here, and today I'm going to show you how to get your Evans drum heads sounding real sick. In other words, we're going to be doing some drum tuning. All right, guys, so we're going to start first with the snare drum. I have here my 14x7 Tama John Tempesta signature snare. It's a great drum. I do still have the old drum heads on here, though, so we're going to go ahead and get those off first. I'm going to be using a power drill with the Evans drum key drill bit. Very handy little thing. So let's go ahead and get these heads off first, and then we'll go from there. All right, so we have both of the heads off now. This would be a good time to wipe it down with a rag. A lot of the time, stick sawdust gets trapped underneath the hoops, you know. So if you have a rag, it's a good time to wipe it down, but you know, don't have to. Maybe you like it to have some character with the sawdust in there, you know what I'm saying? At any rate, now we're going to go ahead and put some new heads on. I'm going to start with the top head. We're going to be using the Evans Heavyweight Dry, which is a relatively new head from Evans. I've used it a lot already. It's a great head. It sounds phenomenal. It's going to sound great on this drum. So let's go ahead and get that on. Now, I'm also going to use the drum key drill bit to start putting this head on. But you want to make sure that if you're using a drum key drill bit to actually start putting a head on, that you don't actually add real tension. You know, you don't want to tighten the head down with the drill bit. That could end badly. I just use it to kind of get all the tension rods closer to the hoop, if that makes sense. So hold on here. First I line them all up. Grab the drill. And just get them right close there. We're going to finish things off with the drum, with the actual drum key. Okay, now that we have them close to tight, we're going to use the drum key and actually get everything to finger tight. You can do this with a drum key, meaning like put it on, but you don't, you know, use it for the full torque. You just kind of use your fingers around the cylindrical part and get everything to finger tight. Now, I use a technique, I don't know what this is called or if it even has a name, but I basically skip every 2 tension rods. So I'll just choose an arbitrary tension rod for now. Let's say I choose this one right here. I'm going to start with that one and then skip these 2, go to this one, skip these 2, go to this one, skip these 2, go to this one, and so on and so forth. And basically, by doing this, you will hit every tension rod once and eventually end back up on the same one you started on before ever hitting the same one twice. This doesn't work on all drums. It has to be at least 8 lugs or more, I believe. So if you're doing this on a tom that only has maybe 5 lugs, it's not going to work. But it does work, you know, for pretty much all snare drums. I mean, most snare drums are 8 lug, 8 or 10. You know, maybe a super low-end drum might be like 6, but for the most part, this is going to do the trick just fine. So first things first, we're just getting everything to finger tighten. Okay, so we have the snare top head, the batter head, basically just finger tight. There's really nothing to it at the moment. So now we're going to start. I'm going to do probably half turns to tension it up using the same technique I just did, skip every 2. So we'll start here, do a half turn. And right now, we're not going to focus too much on the overall pitch of the drum. Right now, we're just going to kind of get it tensioned up, maybe even overly tensioned, and we'll come back and revisit the actual tuning once we have the bottom head on as well. But basically right now, the first thing I do, especially if I'm changing both heads at once, is I like to get the top head on, get it tensioned up, and then go through and try to pitch match all the tension rods on the top. Or if I am changing both heads, the reason I like to do the top head first is so that way I can hear the pitch of each top lug, tension rod, whatever you want to call it, without having it bounce off of, you know, the resonant head and interfere with the frequencies at all. So that's feeling pretty good. So much of drum tuning is, you know, a feel factor too. You know, I mean, I've had friends that use all kinds of different gadgets, you know, things that kind of help you pitch each thing individually, but for me, I do go to a certain pitch, but it's also a feel thing, So now I have the drum head tensioned on quite a bit, probably tighter than I'm going to want it in the end. But I'm just going to go around now and kind of try to get the tension rods to an equal pitch. It doesn't have to be the final pitch that we're going to be using, but it's just kind of to even things out. All right, so that'll do for now. Again, this is kind of just to make sure the tension is evenly distributed. We're going to actually focus more on the tuning after we get the bottom head on. So let's go ahead and get the bottom head on next. We're going to do the same thing for the snare bottom. We're just going to kind of get everything finger tight first. Snare bottoms are a little bit tricky sometimes because the snare bed can be a little bit misleading. The snare bed in certain drums, depending on how deep it is, you can feel like one part isn't tensioned enough when it really might be. The snare bed just kind of, makes it kind of tricky, but not to worry. We're going to be going for, I like to do my snare bottom heads medium tight. To be totally honest, I don't worry too much about the overall pitch of the snare bottom. I mean, I want it to be medium tight, but in terms of tone, because the snare wires are pressed up against the head, it's deadening it a lot, It does matter, the overall pitch, but if one lug is a little bit different than another, in my opinion, it's never mattered that much because you don't really hear that in the final tone. The snares kind of deaden that aspect of the snare sound. And for me, a lot of the time, snare bottom specifically is really a feel thing. I know a lot of people. I remember being a young drummer and being kind of intimidated by, changing drum heads and tuning everything up and feeling like, I don't know, just being a young teenager and worrying about changing drum heads. Now it's second nature. It is the kind of thing that the more you do it, the more you practice tuning, the better you're going to get at it. And if you have the ability to record yourself, you're also going to get a lot better at it because what you'll find is that the more you record, the more you'll hear how like something might sound really good in the room to your natural ear, but then you put it under microphones and you record it and it sounds totally different. And you start to kind of subconsciously learn how things are going to translate under microphones because microphones are really like the audio version of a microscope. You're hearing everything super close up. So it starts to kind of retrain your ear for knowing how things are going to translate underneath the microphones. And then you can, in a room, it's affected how I tune because I'll tune with that in mind now, not even fully consciously, but it is a big part of it. So if you do have the ability to record yourself, like most of the time, I'm not going to do it so much today, but most of the time when I tune something up, I'll tune it up and then I'll hit it. I'll get it sounding good in the room first, like just to my natural ear, but then I'll actually record all the hits. I'll go around the toms, the snare, the kick, and then I'll listen to it through the monitors and see how it sounds that way and then come and make adjustments. But a lot of the times, sometimes I don't even do that anymore, to be totally honest, just because like if it's just for a drum video, I won't always. For, a real recording, I definitely would. But just for drum videos and stuff, sometimes I'll just go with it, because it's like I know how things translate so much better now just from doing it for so many years. So something to keep in mind. Now we're going to go ahead and do the same technique to tighten this up. Skip every two, starting here. That's another thing I do. I don't know where I started doing that or why, but I will often, with snare bottom especially, I'll run my finger around the hoop on the inside to kind of see like if all of a sudden it feels like it's dipping more or going higher more or something. I'll be like, oh man, the tension must not be evenly distributed. Again, though, you want to keep in mind the snare bed is going to change that a little bit. But, this is like I said, it's a feel thing for me too. So it's feeling pretty even. It's definitely a little tighter over here. So I might go through a few individual ones and try to get that feel evened out. It's feeling pretty good. So that's like a medium tight. It's definitely not loose. So we can go around and kind of pitch match some of the individual ones. But again, the snare bed changes things a little bit. See, and that's that tells me just now my finger I felt like this side was a little bit raised up and the pitch was a little bit lower there, so. But again, with the ones right around the snare bed, I don't overthink those too much. The snare bed is there, so it's going to kind of change the pitch of those ones a little bit. But that's about where I would have the snare bottom, and to be honest, that's pretty much all I do. Again, I don't worry as much tonally about it, simply because, you know, the snares are going to be pushed up against it, so they're going to kind of change the whole vibe of it. I do think it's really important to change your snare bottom head, just for the record. Maybe you don't need to do it every single time you do the snare top head, but I usually do it every 3 or so times. You know, some guys will leave a snare bottom head on for years, but I don't recommend it. They stretch out considerably. All snare bottom heads are much, much thinner, whether you're using the, you know, snare side 200, 300, or 500, they're thinner than, you know, a top head traditionally. And, you know, it's just going to stretch out over time, and that can eventually weaken it. And also having the snares pressed up against it eventually can kind of create some little tears, like super, super minor tears, but all it takes is the right hit at a show and that'll crack wide open. I've broken more snare bottom heads than snare top heads. So, but yeah, now that we have both heads on, we're going to get the snare wires on next, and then we're going to go into the actual tuning. All right, so for snare wires, we're going to use the Pure Sound Super 30. I really like the Super 30. It's kind of like a little bit snarier of a sound, which makes sense being that there are more snares. 30 versus more traditional 20 or 24 strand. So let's go ahead and open these up. All the Pure Sound stuff, of course, comes with... So this Super 30, I guess this version comes with wire. I don't like wire as much. I usually prefer to have a little strap of some kind, but we'll use the wire here since we have it. Now, initially, I like to have both... Well, this drum has 2 adjustable strainers, but if they don't, you know, if you just have the one, you want to set them so they're basically in the middle tension-wise of how tight or loose they can go. So we're going to wire this through. Okay, so now I like to kind of evenly space them. If you pull on either side, you can see how they twist there. You know, so you want to keep that in mind in a moment here. But for now, I usually will open the strainer a little bit past halfway, and keep in mind, again, the tension of the strainer itself should be in about the halfway point. So halfway in terms of actual tightness, and then halfway open if possible. And then we're going to tighten down one side first. I like to do the end that doesn't actually release first. And I mostly have them center, but maybe not quite center. I'll pull it a little bit closer to that butt end. And then we're going to go ahead and tighten that down. Make sure the wire is positioned correctly. Now this is the trickier part. So again, we have this set about halfway open. Assuming it hasn't fallen. Yeah, we're good. Because it's halfway open, and because we have the actual tightening piece about halfway as well, we should be all right. I basically tighten this down so that the snares are almost tight. It's a feel thing. The more you do it, the better you get at it. But it's not actually tight. It's just close to tight. So now we have both ends tight. If I close the strainer the rest of the way, now I think that's a little bit too loose. Well, it might be good. Let's go ahead and flip around again. Because I have the strainer set at about half tension, we might be able to tighten it up enough the rest of the way. It's definitely too loose. So let's go ahead and flip that back over real quick. Looks like there's enough space on that side. So now we're going to just open the side up once more and just pull the wires back down a tiny, tiny bit. Okay, So now, if anything, it's probably too tight. But I would rather it be too tight going on, and then we can loosen it. See, right now I'm trying to close the strainer and can't really, but that's okay. Kind of going to loosen it while I'm actually turning the strainer on. That's pretty good. All right. Now, honestly, the snares might be a little bit too tight, but they're about where I like them. Yeah. So we may adjust the tension of the throw-offs ever so slightly when we're tuning, but for now, that's basically how you put on the snares. It's a little bit of trial and error. I struggled there a little bit. I really don't like these wires as much as just an actual, strap. But the wires do work fine as well. So some people like to tie them off as well. I would probably just cut the excess off with some scissors. But yeah, it's a lot of trial and error and just kind of fine tuning as you move along. But I do think the key is to have the tightening bolt of the strainer itself set at about the halfway point. And then when you actually start to tighten down the wire into either end of the butt end of the strainers, you actually have it kind of half closed. So that way it can be a little bit tight. You pull it the rest of the way closed and you can either tighten or loosen it. So that's how I do snare wires. And yeah, next we're going to do some tuning. All right, so for tuning, right now I haven't done anything. I tensioned up the top head, I tensioned up the bottom head, I put on the new snares, and I also, in general, especially for the top head, kind of pitch matched the tension rods a bit. So I don't have any dampening on it. I really haven't tuned it specifically yet. Let's just see how it sounds. To be honest, I think that sounds pretty sick. It's maybe a little bit higher than what I want to do, but it sounds pretty good. And that also goes to show you that a lot of drum tuning is a feel thing. Like, I've just done this so much, that I know what it's going to sound like from the way it feels, even just from feeling around the heads, both top and bottom. I think the tightness of the snares themselves was actually pretty good there. So I'm not going to do much to those at the moment. Now I'm going to bring the drum down in pitch slightly, I think. And to do that first, I'm just going to actually turn the snares off for a moment. So I'm just going to go around and maybe do like a quarter turn down on each tension rod. All right, so now that we've brought it down, now let's go ahead and actually kind of double check each tension rod. Some of these are definitely more off than others, so let me listen to all of them first. And it depends on what you're going for. If you want, you could loosen up the tighter ones or you could tighten up the looser ones, But in general, overall range-wise, I like the pitch of that. Yeah. Drum tuning is so finicky in general, Like, there are times where I'm just like, why can't I get this one lug to, like, come up significantly or something? And I don't know, maybe it's the drum, maybe it's the head, maybe it's resonating off the bottom head. I don't know. There are any number of reasons. You can get really scientific with tuning, and I think there's something to that for sure. In fact, I have a friend, Nolly, who I've learned a lot from myself, but he has a very scientific method to tuning, and I always kind of envied it. And then one time when he was staying here and we were doing some nerdy drum stuff, I was kind of like, man, I really need to get more scientific about it. And he was kind of like, dude, your method works for you, and it's part of your sound, and your drums always sound good, and for me personally, that's just a lot of trial and error and messing around with different stuff and knowing how it's going to translate and that sort of thing. So there really is no right or wrong way, is what I'm trying to say. It's all very subjective. All right, so let's just hear how that sounds with the snares. Sounds pretty sick. Now, if I was doing more of a rock thing, I'd probably leave, just totally open. The heavyweight dry is a pretty dry head anyway, so it sounds pretty good. Let me just kind of hit this for a second. So that is definitely higher than I planned on tuning it, but I like how it sounds. This drum, lends itself to being tuned fairly high. Now, if I was doing something that needed to have a lower snare sound, I would probably spend more time and maybe tune it lower or something, but depending on what I'm doing, if I like the way it sounds, I just roll with it. So So I think that sounds pretty sick. We're going to leave that there. I think the higher tuning sounds great for this drum, so let's go ahead and leave it as is. All right, guys, that is all for today. I hope you got some insight into my method for drum tuning. Don't get too discouraged. In general, remember, it just takes time and patience, and the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. It's definitely sicker when you have some dope Evans drum heads, so make sure to get some, you know what I'm saying? But I hope you all learned something, and I will see you next time. Peace out.